I've seen the same thing happen over and over: a sleek product photo, a list of impressive numbers, and then when the box arrives the machine feels more like a showroom prop than a tool you can actually rely on in your workshop. It's especially frustrating with CNC routers because a tiny misalignment or a confusing wiring setup can turn a weekend hobby into a week-long troubleshooting marathon. If you're on the fence about spending a few $100s on a router that promises professional-grade results, you're probably wondering whether the hype actually translates into real-world performance. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What makes the FoxAlien Z Pro stand out in the crowded entry-level market is that it ships as a bundle with a 1.5 kW VFD spindle upgrade kit. That's a lot of promise in a single box, and it forces us to ask a simple question: does the whole system work together as advertised, or do you end up with a half-finished setup that still needs a dozen extra parts? I spent a few evenings pulling the machine out of the box, wiring the spindle, and running a series of tests that mirror what a typical maker would do: engraving a PCB, cutting a small piece of hardwood, and lightly milling an aluminum blank. The experience was a mix of pleasant surprises and a few headaches that are worth flagging before you click Add to Cart. First-time assembly was genuinely straightforward. The frame comes pre-drilled. The 65mm spindle clamp snaps into place without any special tools, and the VFD spindle itself is marketed as a plug-and-play unit. When you connect the 3-wire power cable and hook the motor leads to the VFD, the whole thing powers up within minutes. The wiring diagram on the included PDF is clear, and the VFD's built-in soft start means you don't have to worry about the motor jerking the gantry when you hit start. For anyone who's never dealt with a separate spindle and controller, that simplicity is a real time saver. Precision is where the Z Pro tries to earn its professional badge. The spec sheet boasts a radial runout tolerance of under 0.005 mm, and in practice the machine lived up to that claim for light engraving work. I ran a 0.1 mm line test on a 3 mm MDF board, and the resulting path was consistently within 1/10 of a millimeter of the programmed line. That level of accuracy is more than enough for hobbyist signage, PCB etching, or fine inlays. However, the machine's rigidity starts to show its limits once you push into harder materials. When I attempted a shallow cut on a 5 mm aluminum sheet, the spindle maintained speed, but the gantry flexed just enough to introduce a visible chatter mark. The Z Pro can handle soft metals, but you'll quickly discover that a more robust frame or upgraded linear rails are needed for anything beyond light milling. Speaking of upgrades, the kit includes an Z-axis extension and a linear rail upgrade option, both of which are sold separately. The standard travel on the base unit is 600 mm on the Z-axis and 400 mm on the Y-axis, which is fine for most hobby projects. If you need a longer cut, the extension kit bolts on without having to redesign the entire frame, but you do have to purchase it separately and recalibrate the limits in your controller software. The linear rail option is a worthwhile investment if you plan to spend a lot of time cutting hardwood or aluminum. The stock VARs are adequate for light work, but they can develop microplay after a few hundred hours of operation, leading to the kind of small drift that ruins tight tolerances. The controller side of the package is another practical consideration. The Z Pro ships with a basic GRBL board that plugs into a USB port on your PC. The firmware is compatible with popular free software like Laser GRBL and Universal Code Sender, so you won't need to buy a pricey commercial controller. However, the board doesn't offer advanced features like torque monitoring or automatic tool change, which means you'll be manually swapping bits and watching the spindle load yourself. For a hobbyist who enjoys the hands-on aspect of CNC work, that's fine, but a small shop looking for a semi-automated workflow might find it limiting. Now, who should actually consider putting this bundle on their bench? If you're a woodworker who wants to add a reliable engraving capability to an existing tabletop router, the Z Pro gives you that without a massive footprint. It's also a solid entry point for makers who want to dip their toes into metal but aren't ready to invest in a full-size industrial mill. The 1.5 kW spindle provides enough torque for light aluminum work, and the VFD gives you fine speed control, which is essential for preventing burn-through on thin sheets. For educators or makerspaces that need a machine that can be set up quickly for multiple users, the